Okay, well, I am Heather Rensink. I work here at the hospital. I'm a nurse, and I've been a nurse for about 5 years, about 2.5 of that here. So today we're talking about fearfully and wonderfully made, and just kind of what it looks like on the healthcare side and Christian perspective on that. So most of you have probably heard the song Dem Bones. Heel bone's connected to the ankle bone's connected to the shin bone, and so on and so forth. Now this song has some truth to it. Our bodies are pretty intricately designed as you learn more about them, and all systems work together to help us function. Now, heart, we could talk for days about how we are designed and what each organ system does, but today we're just going to take a real brief glance at the heart. Now our heart pumps the blood, right, and carries oxygen and nutrients that rids the body of waste and carbon monoxide and such. Goes to all of our vital organs and helps us to breathe, think, filter, fight infections, and so on and so forth. Basically, we count on this working correctly. Now, on the inverse, as the heart affects a lot of other organs also affect our heart. Now, if our lungs have back pressure, we go into heart failure. We have imbalanced electrolytes, we go into arrhythmias, etc. One common problem that we see with our heart is hypertension or high blood pressure. So your heart is pumping against the increased pressure. Now, as it continues to pump against this pressure, our heart walls thicken, leading to heart failure. Our vessels change and are increased risk for stroke or a heart attack. And our vessels to our eyes and kidneys are going to be impacted and therefore are not going to work or function properly either way. Many of these heart problems are manageable, but it is not a guarantee, and it sometimes takes trial and error, and it's rarely an immediate fix, which in our culture of 2-day Amazon Prime shipping, that can be really hard to hear and accept. Throughout the course of these illnesses, as a nurse, I see a lot of the ands in healthcare. Your most joyful and fearful moments, you celebrate victories and experience sorrow, and you see the beauty and the mess. In Psalm 139:14, it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. So we'll dive into the ands just a little bit more here on what it looks like on my side of healthcare. The joy and the fear. Part of the joy of healthcare is we have modern medicine that allows us many treatment options and allows us the ability to recover from many illnesses or accidents. For example, a heart attack, you can often go to the cath lab and have your vessels reopened. If you have heart failure, we can give diuretics and remove the excess fluid. On the flip side of the joy is the fear. Now, fear is a distressing emotion aroused by impending danger, evil, or pain. It plays a large role in medicine from the patient's perspective. A new diagnosis is scary, and how the patient reacts to this fear can be displayed in a wide variety of ways. It can be cut actions. So despite modern medicine and our best efforts, full recovery is not always a guarantee. In Jeremiah 30:17, it says, For I will restore health to you and heal all of your wounds, says the Lord. Now, as we know, God keeps his promises, but he never promises that it'll be fulfilled here on earth. Instead, restored health may not come until we enter eternity. The next and is victories and sorrow. On the victory side, one example that we see is, a stroke patient. They may learn how to walk again. They regain their independence. And as a nurse, I get the opportunity to be the encourager to my patients. Take it one day at a time, celebrating little victories, because it takes a lot longer to heal than it does to get hurt. This is also where we get the opportunity to build the relationships with our patients and their families to help them set and achieve goals. Now, the other side of it is sorrow. Watching families lose a loved one. Now, note I said watching families lose the loved one. It's the family's sorrow, because one thing that I've noticed and been able to see is that patients who are towards the end of life have such a unique perspective. And I know that the hospice nurses talked a couple weeks ago, but they have some of the neatest conversations I've had has been with people who are have a grim outlook or have, maybe in the process of dying. And their unique outlook on life and, reflection of life is a really, really cool, it's a really cool perspective. And that's some of that unique piece is something that a lot of the rest of us don't understand. Now the last part is the beauty and the mess. The first part of Psalm 139 says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." So the beauty of this is some of the most beautiful things I've seen is the birth of a new baby. Now the miracle is both the mother's body as well as the infant's. The joy, the anticipation, all the beauty in it. A healthy baby learns how to breathe on their own. Their heart changes composition when they're born, and they have the instinct to eat, and etc. It's a miracle. The other side of it is the messy side. Caring for people is both physically and mentally challenging at times, because I obviously have my own emotions and the patients have their own emotions that sometimes it's hard. As a night nurse, I also have kind of a unique perspective sometimes, is as family members might go home or company leaves, patients open up and share what they're thinking. Quite often we see that they've accepted their diagnosis or they're okay with what the outcome could look like for them, but they're staying strong for their family or indifferent till they get to that place as well. Sometimes this also means we can be a patient advocate, whether it's addressing a concern or insecurities with failing health. But unfortunately, we also see the worst in people, especially on the hospital and ER side, when people are not feeling well, they're in pain, etc. Recently, I was challenged and reminded that even though my job is not always glamorous and our patients are not always understanding, God found them important enough to send Jesus to die for them. So in healthcare, we get the opportunity to witness and show Christ's love on a daily basis, which is pretty cool. It's a challenge, but it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Good morning. A couple of thanks first. I'd like to thank Prof for being a big part of my life. Most of you may not know, back in the fall of 1981, when I came to Northwestern, I was pre-vet. And the first week of nothing wrong with that. But the first week of school, Prof says, I think you should be pre-medicine instead of pre-vet. And I said, okay. And that was about the end of the conversation. So, and that was the beginning of it all. Second, I'd like to thank Marty for having a great place and an amazing place to work. I couldn't do what I do without great nurses like Heather to help me, or great techs like Michaela to help me in surgery. So I appreciate that. And great nurses like Lori in clinic. Unfortunately, I need my cheaters because I'm getting old. So, Psalm 139. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And that's important. I know that full well. Excuse me. So, in Colossians 1:15, it talks about the supremacy of Christ. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth. And all things were created by him, and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Can I have that first slide, please? We're going to try to compress a semester of biochemistry into about 5 minutes. So my apologies, Prof, for any omissions, and I hope there's not a quiz afterwards. So, yeah, no pop quizzes. So this is the fearfully and wonderfully made part. This is our coagulation cascade, how your blood clots. At the beginning of surgery, I make an incision, and the patient will bleed. and that's the damaged surface, that's the trauma. All these coagulation factors act together so you will form a clot and not bleed out during surgery. And you can see that it's very complex. There's over 30 proteins involved in this. And if one of them is not there or not functioning properly, you have big problems. For example, factor 8 is the hemophilia type protein that if you don't have that, you don't convert factor 10 to 10A, and you will bleed. You don't clot, and that's what a hemophiliac has. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have proteins like protein C and S that help stop the coagulation process. Because if you think about it, there has to be an endpoint. If you start having a clot form and it just propagates without end, your whole body will clot off. So there has to be factors that stop the cascade. Thrombin will act as a feedback loop to stop the coagulation process. It activates the proteins that stop the coagulation protein. So we'll see patients with protein C and S deficiency. They're prone to clot and have problems. And if you have deficiencies in thrombin, nothing's going to work. So to me, this is an example of what Michael Behe calls in his book Darwin's Black Box, a irreducibly complex biological system. This didn't happen by accident, and it is too complex to be an accident. But yet we have a fallen world where there's problems with it, and that's where medicine helps interact with that. Next slide, please. So that's the beginning of surgery. We make an incision. At the end of the surgery, there's all sorts of processes going on where you have initial inflammation in the wound, there's immune systems triggered, there's cytokines, prostaglandins, fibroblasts, macrophages, white blood cells, all interacting in a system that helps start heal the wound. Then you have, wound changes where collagen fibers are laid down. There's cross-linking that takes, weeks to months, and that's why I tell you can't lift for 6 weeks after surgery. We're getting that collagen to get cross-linking. And to me, this is even more complex in some ways than the coagulation cascade because there's multiple organ systems involved that are in some ways independent of each other. And that didn't happen by accident either. And if you think about it, without these mechanisms in place, any wound would be a fatal wound. And for them to happen by accident, how did that bone know it should heal itself? Or that cut in the skin should heal itself? So then in Romans 8:20, for the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be liberated from the bondage to decay. So that's where I see problems starting. Surgical problems for me are a reminder that we live in a fallen world, and my calling is to be part of Christ's redemptive process in the healing. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and the end, and he is the blood that saves us and that heals our wounds. So, every day I can't do surgery without God's processes. And so I am just the instrument and Jesus is the surgeon. So that's all I have. Any questions? I mean, I could tell you some stories probably, but I don't remember names. Well, yeah. The question is, why do atheists not see this and realize that there's a God? And I think, to me, that goes back to Romans 1, where you'll see that their hearts are darkened and they cannot see the truth because of the sin that is in them. And an example, a true life example for me is that, Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities and his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. And back when I was a resident, there was a resident that I worked with who was Romans 1. I mean, literally Romans 1. He grew up in the church, went away from God, divorced his wife, and married a man. And one day we were opening an abdomen. I know this is kind of a surgery thing you might not understand, but sometimes you see a beautiful sunset and just go, wow, there's a creator. And we opened this guy's belly, and we both just stood there and it was amazing. It was perfect. It was unbelievable. And we sat there in silence, and he's an atheist and thought the same thing and was stunned. And I said, man, it's almost like it was created. And he's like, rah, 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 rah. So I didn't convert him at that point, but I think they really just don't see the darkness in their own heart, and until God opens their eyes, they're not going to see it. But I see it every day that there's just no way it happened. It's too beautiful, too complex, too amazing. So. Yes. No, I really didn't. The question was, did my professors try to persuade me against, Christian belief? And not really, but it really wasn't discussed either that much. It was just, pure science. This is what you're learning. I don't know if you had any different experience. Yeah. The question is, does spirituality affect the emotions going into surgery or the hospital and that sort of thing? And absolutely, I will see patients who have a faith. They will be much more calm about going to surgery and much more accepting about what's going on. And the people that don't have faith are very fearful about what's next, especially dying, because they don't know what's next, and it does make a difference. And it raises an interesting point. It's like, well, where do you balance, okay, we're taking good care of the patients versus there's a spiritual God helping us, So I don't always pray with my patients. I have, but a few times it's come up and they'll say, the pastor will say, well, do we need to pray? And the patient will go, well, do I need it? So part of not creating stress is making it think that it's a reasonable and normal thing that we're going through, even though surgery is, anything can go wrong at any time, but for the most part, it's a very safe and normal thing. Anita? Yeah, so the question is, what about evolution? Short question. I think there's a difference between macroevolution, where there's deletion of genes and chromosomes and big changes in species, and microevolution, where there's changes in our bodies and so forth. And I think my own feeling is that when people in the secular world talk about Darwinian evolution, they're talking about evolution without God. that's by chance, and it just happened. Now, if you talk about theistic evolution, where is there intelligent design, is there a creator? Absolutely, I see evidence of that everywhere. And so part of the healing process in bones and in tissue and these sorts of things are written in our DNA code. And just a few years ago, they had lots of gene sequences in DNA that they called junk DNA. And they thought it was a part of the evolutionary process that was wasted genes and wasted space. And now they're finding out that this junk DNA is layer after layer after layer of feedback in things like this, the healing process. And so there's so much evidence for intelligent design that, in fact, if you look at, it's the physics and astrophysics, they call it the God particle. They don't know what holds this all together, and so they call it the God particle. So I think, is there things that are changing about our bodies? Yes, but I don't believe in macroevolution where a species went to another species evolution. I think God created them each to their own kind, just like it says in Genesis. Any other questions? Heather needs to answer something.
I just have a comment as a consumer of medical on your expertise. We in Orange City are so thankful for a cadre of physicians that see their gifts and their talents coming from God himself, and that we can go under your knife or we can go under your understanding, knowing that you're going into that. This is just not everywhere, and how blessed we are. So thank you for, thank the Lord for those blessings, and you're part of that, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I would throw back that to Marty a little bit, in that he's created an environment where people want to be there and operate and work in a setting like that, and I appreciate that too. So, yeah, I'm incredibly blessed to do what I do, and I really like what I do. Certainly, there's some negative sides in the length of the training and the call and the nights and stuff like that, but I'm just blessed every day. Any other questions? Doug? Right, so the question's about continuing education, and that's an interesting point, because I do a lot of things now that I didn't do when I was in training, in residency, both techniques and instruments and that sort of thing. And so we are required to do continuing education every year, and to keep my board certification, it's like 100 hours every 2 years. So I've done, some of it's going to conferences, some of it's doing online stuff. I've gone to a few clinic type settings where you actually learn procedures, do something on a pig. Dave, thanks. So there's some of that, keeping up on the latest things, but some of it really goes down to if you had 5 years of general surgery training and you're trained in basic techniques and how to do things, a new procedure really isn't that big of a thing, because you're using the same guiding principles, in the operation that you're doing. So it's not a quantum leap to go to a new skill. Yeah.
Not near as much as him. No, Tamara would know better than I. 36, I think, every 3 years. Yeah. So, yep, every time our license renews. So, but there too, it's always changing. I've only been a nurse for 5 years, and even ACLS, how do we, when we code somebody, even those meds have changed in just the 5 years that I've been a nurse. So.
How do you handle the stress that
Yeah, how do you handle the stress that we see? Well, that is definitely part of the messy part of it. A lot of it is your good support system and your coworkers, because you're never in the mess alone. That's, I think, a big thing for me on the nursing side is we're never in it alone. You're in the mess together. You talk through it together. So I think that's a lot of it on my side.
Yeah, how do you handle the stress? Some of it goes back to that long training, and you went through hours and hours and years of getting ready for that. You had a mentor helping you. You had older residents beside you helping you through that process. And so by the end of that, you're ready to do it yourself. And that, being ready takes and prepared takes a lot of that stress away. Not that it's stress-free, and certainly there's anxious moments when you're dealing with people and their lives and what's happening. But, when I start a surgery, I have to believe in my heart that I'm going to help that patient, that I'm going to make an incision that's actually going to help them. And it seems like an oxymoron. I'm going to cut them to heal them. But knowing through experience that this person's going to get better, this process is going to go away, and their life is going to be full again, helps relieve a lot of that.
How about the fourth Saturday in October? Does that help?
That always helps. Unless it's a bad day like yesterday.
Steve, my question is regarding how you feel differently today than one of the first 5 years you were out, but how you can share your faith in the midst of your position.
Certainly when you come out of practice or out of residency and you're starting your practice, you are really just gung-ho to operate, and because that's what you'd spent so many years doing, and so part of it was just enjoying what you did. And now, I've been a patient myself a couple of times, and you kind of learn what the other side of the drape is. And so to me, it's a more personal view of how patients feel when they're sick, and what they're going through when they know the unknowns of, do I need chemo? Do I have to go through this kind of treatment or not? So I think I'm more empathetic and sympathetic than I was. I hope anyway.
I'd be interested, on the science side, from start till now, obviously science discovers new drugs and other things like that. But what have you learned on the science side that maybe
That's a hard question because I use steel and sharp instruments. I don't get into the biochemistry side very much.
what makes you more convinced that we are fearfully and wonderfully?
Yeah, I think if you look at the coagulation cascade, and if you've ever been, say, in a major trauma case where there's massive bleeding, you're given massive amounts of blood products, and they develop what's called DIC, or disseminated intravascular coagulation, and nothing is right. They bleed, they can't clot, and the developments in how we give fluid resuscitation in trauma patients and blood products in trauma patients has changed a lot since when I first started residency. Thankfully, we don't deal with a lot of trauma patients like that here. One, because we wouldn't have the blood bank supply to take care of that. But two, the other things that go along with it, like head injuries and needing ventilators and that sort of thing. But the science side of thing is there's a lot of trauma research in the blood, and also in wound healing and how we take care of wounds and that sort of thing. Any other questions? Well, for example, in the bleeding side of things, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that you can't get blood products, that you're going to go to hell. And, I had a case in residency that an 8-year-old boy was severely injured, and his dad was a Jehovah's Witness, and he didn't want us to give him any blood. And then it's like, that's a big ethical question. What do you do? In Iowa state law is that you get a judge involved and they give you a waiver to treat this patient. But that's a pretty stark one, and how you treat a patient and whether you do what's right for a child versus what their parents want.
What'd you do?
We gave him blood. Yeah. I think that there's a verse that they hang it on, something about don't eat blood, that sort of thing, but to me it has no basis in theology. But yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Tom to. Oh. Yeah, so how secure is my job? That's up to Marty. I'm hanging by a thread every day. Right. I think there's things that will be less common. For example, I really think there'll be a day that we don't operate on breast cancer anymore, and it'll be a gene therapy, chemotherapy directed thing that we won't ever do the excision. We may do a biopsy to diagnose it, but we won't do the radical surgeries that we do now. On the other side, yes, I think my job is secure. We're always going to have acute appendicitis and gallbladder attacks and colon cancers and things that we deal with on a regular basis. So I think we're still going to need surgeries. I don't think we're going to get quite like Dr. McCoy in Star Trek and go with the transponder and we're done. I don't think that'll happen. So. Good.
Yeah, what's that? You want to close in prayer? Okay. Well, you may certainly do so. I did make it back from Sanborn and caught the end of this. I cannot wait to watch the whole thing. Hopefully got that recorded. And I just wanted to thank Steve and Heather for your leadership and your participation, your wisdom, and to kind of wrap up the Fred Talks. Now, I mean, this is 8 of 8, and I don't know about you, but I have been incredibly blessed. Have you been as well by the people that have shared? Yeah, it's been amazing. The wisdom from all these different areas of life. And my picture is that that's just kind of a little bit of a peek under the hood of what First Reformed Church is like in its entirety. There's so many more stories that could be shared. God has given us as a church so many incredible, incredible gifts. And hopefully this is recorded well, that we'll see if we can maybe even package up all 8 of them somehow in a way we can download them. Our new church website, spoiler, should be coming within the next month, and we'll see if we can have those all available to you there. We just have audio from last week because we did have some technical difficulties, but I'd like to do this again sometime and find 8 more and see how God has used this church on Monday through Saturday, because the church is not the worship service and it's not the building. The church is the called out people of God, and they're called here on Sunday, and then they're sent on Monday to do amazing things. And I'm in awe of what God is up to among the people of First Reformed Church. So Tom is going to close in prayer, and so thank you for coming to the First Reformed Church Encouragement Dialogues. Tom.
I was wondering if I could have that first slide up. We get that. Yeah, so this is finally, I have found a plan that when I'm asked to be a football coach, this is it. This is the winner one. Thank you for that. But how cool to just look at this, and it makes my heart just sing with joy that there's a God behind all of this. and that it's at work we don't even understand, and how much is that like grace, that his work in our lives when we didn't even realize he was doing those things. So praise be to his name. I wanted to close because this is the end of the Fred Talks, and thank you, Tim, for getting these folks together. But next week we begin a new elective in this place, and I have asked counselors, if you, in the bulletin, Terry did a very nice job of explaining what, for 3 weeks, we're going to be exploring what kids say when mom and dad aren't around. And I have some counselors from Unity and from OCCS as well as MOC coming, not to really tell you what you should be doing, but for you to hear what they're saying. And this isn't just for moms and dads, but if you're a grandma and grandpa, you are dealing with kids. If you are an uncle or an aunt, or if you're a teacher. So it's just not for parents, but for those that have any interaction with children and youth. I think this will be very helpful. Again, we thank you folks for sharing, and we thank God for being able to have this stuff that we can share as well. And let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give thanks and praise to you that we are wonderfully and fearfully made, and that underneath it all, behind it all, there is a God of design, a God of love, a God of great creativity, a God who cares for us. Thank you for the folks that share today, and for all the other ones that have been sharing these things with us. We thank you also for the opportunity we have to learn these things and to once again be committed and convinced that you are who you are, that we are in your hands, that nothing, life nor death, will separate us from your great love. How good you are, and we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.